Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you from the Colonial Dungeon, this is the Court-Martail Podcast! Introducing your host for this evening, he has a bald spot on the top of his head, and he weighs in tonight at a number you don't need to know. He is the Colonial Loudmouth, Sean McCarty!
Court-Martail Podcast listeners, don't you dare be sour. Clap for your world-famous podcast and feel the power. I'm sure many of you are wondering right now, what the hell is going on? Where is the colonist? Well, I said enough is enough, and it's time for a change. And I'm going to be hosting today's show. And who am I exactly? I'm glad you asked, even though I didn't force you to. I am the man from the Bay who gets it on all day, and I always get my way. You better do what I say, otherwise it's going to be the highway, and you're going to pay. I am Skyler Greenberg at your service. But I am not alone, for I do have a co-host today, and he is a man of 1,400 talents/gifts, including wrestling reviewing, podcast making, Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan cheering, Yu-Gi-Oh card playing, hairstylist, dancer, flowers, you name it, he does it. It is the Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty.
All right, I gotta give you, because as unorthodox as this is, ladies and gentlemen, this was in fact a hostile takeover on Skyler's behalf, but I have to applaud that intro, sir. That was very energetic, charismatic. You have reined them in. You have got them hanging on the edge of your seat, waiting to hear what's going on. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Do not adjust your sets, because it's Skyler's episode today, ladies and gentlemen, on the Court-Martail Podcast. I am so excited for what Skyler's going to bring. It's all Skyler's topics, his spotlight. We're going to have a great time today, and I'm going to be in the passenger seat today. But as always, if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and do what you do to that bell button. I'll use the New Day, and we'll use Do Trouble in Paradise, that bell button, but it is always paradise here at the Court-Martail Podcast.
Why, thank you, my man. And we have some interesting topics today about wrestling. And these are topics that have come up in the last week because of events I was watching.
Yes.
And I'm curious to get your input on them and what they're about.
Absolutely.
So, our first topic, as selected by moi, is none other than the concept of doing too much in wrestling matches. Now, what do I mean by doing too much? So, on our sister podcast, TAW Gaming, hosted by Josh again himself,
yes,
me, Joshua, and Bradley, his friend, watched the TakeOver War Games.
War Games! Right, of course.
I can't do it like Regal, so thank you for that, Sean.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I can pop in an accent at a moment's notice sometimes.
Thank you. Anyways, I would suggest if you get a chance, listen to that. It's a great thing to listen to, and it was a pretty good show, I have to say.
We will pop the link in the description, by the way.
But something about the show came up that just didn't sit right with me. And
Okay.
that was that there was a lot of violence that was, to me, unnecessary. Now, you have not watched War Games, correct?
I have not watched War Games, correct.
Okay, so the highlights of War Games included the women's War Games match that included a spot where Io Shirai jumped up to the top of the cage, put a trash can over her head, and then fell down on the other 7 women.
Who I'm assuming were all just standing there waiting for her to take the bump, right?
Yes.
Okay, right,
And then
I'm with you.
In the men's match, there was Pat McAfee, who proceeded to do the exact same thing without the trash can, except he did like a swanton. He just fell. And no one caught him, and he landed flat back on the mat.
Ow. Props to him for taking
So
that
this-
bump.
Props to him for taking that bump, but the War Games had a bunch of really, really extreme spots, like Ember Moon doing the Eclipse on Dakota Kai on chairs.
Why?
Raquel Gonzalez powerbombing Io Shirai through a table into both of the sections of the ring, on the metal sections of the ring dividers.
I am so desensitized to all of it, to be honest with you.
I know, and that's the thing that I was thinking about, is that we've been watching a lot of shows recently.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this violent stuff, and I've become numb to the pain.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. It feels like the way that wrestling is now, and we'll talk about this in a little bit when we get to our match of the week. It's just there's nothing that's ever slow anymore. I mean, everyone knocks like Orton for being like slow paced, but like it's a handful of people that can handle a methodically paced match where every move under the sun is done by every single individual. And I guess in your concept of too much, I think that in a lot of ways why that occurs so much is that the moves are so overemphasized, and especially when there's so many people in the ring at once. Because how do you keep people's attention among that many people without doing ridiculous things?
Exactly. And it feels like wrestling now is just doing too much, and it's just doing moves for the sake of doing moves. Especially prevalent in our friends at All Elite Wrestling. And the matches they put on.
It's funny you say that, Sky, but I actually have to disagree because it's honestly both. It's both. WWE's just as guilty. They've just got a handful of people at the top who are sensible enough not to do it. But I mean, you look at that
Right.
New Day versus Street Profits match. I mean, what's the difference between that and Private Party versus a couple goons from the Dark Order?
The WWE Thunderdome.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing. So, but the match was.
But you're right. Besides a change of set, there's really no difference between matches between tag team wrestlers or even singles wrestlers on WWE compared to AEW.
And
it's almost exactly the same.
The sad thing is I don't mean to get this into being a rant on AEW, but that I think has been the most disappointing thing about AEW since its inception. It promised different, but instead of different, we got like instead of getting French vanilla, we've gotten the vanilla that you get in the 3 set in like the Neapolitan. So it's still technically vanilla, but it doesn't taste quite the same, but it's still the same ice cream. Do you get what I'm saying?
It's the knockoff.
Yeah.
It's the knockoff. It's just the knockoff cheap generic brand.
And it just doesn't work for me. And it's just like with the whole like, God, I've been looking at some of the clips with Jericho recently, and it's brutal. I mean, I didn't mean to get this into AEW. Again, I did not mean to start slamming AEW, but it's so easy. They're easy targets.
Right, like both WWE and AEW, as well as most wrestling indie shows, are extremely guilty of just doing too much in their matches.
Yeah.
Like, did you see that viral clip I sent you about the guy who flew into a chair?
Yes, I saw that. That was ridiculous.
That was a ridiculous spot. And those guys are like, what, maybe 170, and they're wrestling in a arena with like maybe 50 people in it?
Yeah, like a bingo hall. Like a VFW.
Not even a full bingo hall. It was like a
yeah.
It was like a limited capacity bingo hall.
Yeah, and I mean, granted, it is a COVID situation, so like, so you can't have a ton of people in there, but like at the same time, it's like, I don't know. To me, I think the problem is once people started making a joke out of the wrestling business, unfortunately, people didn't want to bother telling the stories anymore because they felt like the cat was out of the bag and all the work didn't mean anything because everybody knew that the cat was, that wrestling was a joke. And so as a result, people started doing more and more gymnastic stuff, and then everybody had something to prove to everybody, and then everybody needed to learn everything for everybody else. And now we've got 6 people doing the same, and I think a big part of people doing too much is everybody does everybody else's moves. How many frog splashes do we see in a night now? 3, 4?
You're guaranteed at least 3 or 4. Like,
super kicks.
I remember you complaining at Survivor Series that we keep seeing the Samoan drop because 3 different Samoans were on the show.
It's just,
once you see a move, the impact is gone the next time you see it, especially when it's only like maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour from that time.
Well, and especially considering now in a show or in a fan demographic that is so hyper concentrated on moves because of the way that the smart audience works and behaves and appreciates or doesn't appreciate things. So as a result, when you see moves 1,000 times, then they get disinterested, and when they're disinterested, then you lost any fan base.
And it's not just an issue of doing too many moves and desensitizing the audience, but the moves that the wrestlers are doing are all really dangerous, high-impact moves that you never saw back in the old wrestling days.
No.
Like, I mentioned TakeOver War Games. And then I mentioned that there were 2 injuries on that show.
Yeah. Candice LeRae broke her arm.
And then Bobby Fish tore the muscle off of his tricep bone.
Oh, God.
And he has to get surgery, and he's going to be out for several months.
Oh, the poor guy. Too bad he's still contractually obligated to wrestle at ACPW's Winter Warcraft, which you can tune into next week, as it is the conclusion of Skyler's and mine's ACPW versus NWL Fantasy Booking Bonanza. I didn't mean to steal your transition, Sky, but it was so perfectly set up.
I was going to throw it to that transition anyways. And thank you for reminding me that we also have not just ACPW's Winter Warcraft, but also NWL's Frozen Frontier.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Doing the show next week.
So stay tuned.
But that's the thing, is that now injuries are happening so much. And and granted, professional wrestling is a physical sport. You're going to have injuries. That's not a thing of debate. But the frequency of injuries and the severity of injuries is happening more and more and more. Like, there's Bobby Fish's injury, there was Candice LeRae, there was Edge's injury earlier this year, same shoulder problem as Bobby Fish. Kairi Sane had to retire because of concussion issues because of repeatedly being slammed by Nia Jax. There's Dr. Britt Baker's injury. There's all the injuries on AEW. Like, Marco Stunt's still walking around in a walking boot.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the sad reality is that this style is just not sustainable for wrestling. I mean, wrestling was so much better when it was so much simpler and it had the downtime, and yes, it is a little more boring if you're looking for just moves, but it makes the moves mean more. And I think, honestly, the interesting thing is everyone says that wrestling's dying. I think there is now an audience building for wrestling returning to the way it once was. And I think that there may be a resurgence, but it's not going to come out of AEW. That's a fact.
No. If anything, it would have to come from... I don't even necessarily think it would come from WWE. It would be just wrestling fans wanting it to get to simpler things.
It would have to be grassroots, I think.
Before we leave this topic behind, I do want to give praise to wrestlers who tone it down and truly are professional wrestlers who know what they're doing because they've been trained well and they've been coached well, and they're doing it in a style that, yes, could be a little bit boring, but it gets them longevity. Guys like Randy Orton, who has a very basic moveset, but the way he tells his stories in the ring, he doesn't have to take too many injury bumps. Nope. He doesn't have to do too much stuff, and that's why he's had the longevity for his career.
Absolutely.
Another guy like Drew McIntyre, who hasn't had many injury issues, and he's very stiff, He will bruise you, but he's not going to injure you in a severe way that's going to take time off your career.
Right. There's
guys
a lot
like
of
Cody
guys.
Rhodes who can tell a story pretty easily in AEW with even the most mediocre talent. And his stuff is not going to cause you to get hurt.
Most of the time. Yeah, he's not going to heave a chair at your head. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, AEW. As I said, you're a real easy target.
Well, but that's because they make themselves easy targets.
They
by
do.
The talent that they hire,
do.
And the fact that no one is in charge telling people, hey, you need to tone this down.
And
hey, you need to stop doing this. Hey, you need to stop doing that.
And sadly, this kind of publicity of us knocking them, they like that publicity as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't have Jim Cornette's Wang down their throats all the time. where they make all these illicit references. They do. This is something that is a staple of AEW programming. They insist on putting Jim Cornette references into their programming just so Jim Cornette will talk about them and they'll get a ha-ha knowing that he brings a good chunk of audience to watch AEW.
And the sad part is that AEW's ratings have actually been going up the last few weeks because of someone they recently hired who has injury problems of his own and is 62 years old and probably should have stopped wrestling a long, long time.
Well, and that's a good way to segue into your next topic.
That brings us to our next topic. Wrestlers and retirement. Because do wrestlers ever really retire, Sean?
I discussed this briefly. If you recall the episode of the Court-Martail podcast where the thumbnail was that photo of a bloody Flair and a bloody Hogan in the corner.
Oh, I remember that match.
Yes.
God. Wasn't that a tag match with Hogan and like
Abyss?
And
yes.
Ric Flair and AJ Styles?
Yes, it was. That match happened.
God,
and if we could find that on YouTube, we might just throw that in for a match of the week just for giggles. But in any case, I touched on this briefly, but it was nothing, I think retirement, with the way that the Undertaker's quote unquote retirement just came and went, and then Sting coming back concurrently, it's hard. I think it's hard for wrestling smarks like us because we love these individuals for what they did for our childhoods, but now it's at the point where we just want it to stop. Because Sting's going to wrestle.
We want it to stop because the way things are going, these guys are going to really, really hurt themselves if no one stops them. Like the Sting injury, he should never have wrestled for WWE.
I just, to this day, I still think that that match between Sting and Triple H at WrestleMania 31, how was that not just a massive jack-off for the Smarks? Look at us. It's DX versus the NWO. But, oh, wait. We're going to beat WCW again because we feel like it.
WWE
you gotta love the balls
the opportunity
of WWE.
WCW one last time.
You gotta love the balls of WWE to just kick it while it's down. But speaking of WCW, not only is Sting coming back, guess who else has come back, Sky? Your all-time favorite wrestler of all time,
Goldberg.
That's right. It's your show this week. I'm going to make you say it.
I don't want to say it.
You're going to have to say it. You got to. This is your topic, man.
Fine.
Got to cover all aspects.
On a recent WWE podcast or talk show or whatever the hell it is, Goldberg was interviewed, and he was asked if he wants to continue wrestling, and he said yes. And then when he was asked who's next, He said Roman Reigns.
You know how badly Goldberg would be booed? He's going to get...
No, and still no.
He's supposed to be... They're going to try to book him as a babyface, but if there were people in the crowd when these two fought, they would boo that man out of the building. They'd get the babyface pop for Roman Reigns they have always wanted. That's the God's honest truth. They would all be like, no, all hail Tribal Chief Roman Reigns. Get Goldberg the hell out of here. I guarantee you every smark on the planet except Mr. Bobby Robinson over there. But everybody else.
The only people that would hate it would be Goldberg and Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
And what worries me, what concerns me, is that if they do book this match, they will not help themselves, and they'll put the goddamn title on Goldberg.
Oh my
again.
God! Could you imagine? Oh no! Oh no! That sounds awful. That sounds absolutely awful. God, that's terrifying. That is a terrifying thought.
Right, and here's the thing, is that I would be fine with this if this was anyone else, but it's Goldberg, the guy who injured The Undertaker at the Saudi Arabian show.
And Bret Hart.
The guy who went over guys like Kevin Owens and The Fiend because he's a superhero, and he wants to make his son proud. Like, fuck off.
Well, Goldberg, that was at the heat of Bray Wyatt's, at the top of Bray Wyatt's Fiend gimmick. And that was like, right, that's Bray Wyatt.
So
and he hasn't recovered since.
Because Goldberg has to live his fucking glory days because he can't ever let it go. He is the guy. Honestly, I'm going to say a very controversial statement, Sean. Goldberg is worse than the Ultimate Warrior.
There could be comparisons made. I get it.
No, he is worse because, okay, let's just get this out of the way. The Ultimate Warrior was a piece of shit. That is established. But Goldberg is a glory hog in a way that's not just worse than the Ultimate Warrior. It is beyond worse than the Ultimate Warrior because not only was he a glory hog who was a shitty professional wrestler, but he also injured people. He ended Bret Hart's career. Like, Goldberg, there are so many mixed emotions when it comes to Goldberg, but he is one of those guys.
They don't seem pretty mixed from this perspective. They seem pretty clear how you feel, Sky.
Like, I want to like Goldberg because...
No, you don't. You enjoy hating Goldberg.
I want to like him because I share and because he's Jewish. I got both of my Jewish guys, and he is a likable guy when he's not being a jackass. But
he's a likable guy when he's not being a jackass. Aren't we all likable guys when we're not being jackasses?
I understand your point, and I acknowledge it. But for fuck's sake, he cannot let it go. He cannot let the glory days go. And he has to continue going out there saying that he can wrestle, and he can do this, and he can fight with the modern generation of wrestlers. When it's very obvious he can't.
Well, the sad thing is, there's a couple things to blame, and one is just wrestling in general, because I mean, many wrestlers have said before, it really does become an addiction. I mean, Roddy Piper, pretty much up until the year that he died, was doing wrestling gigs just because he was addicted to the roar of that crowd. It's a different kind of addiction, but it is an addiction nonetheless. And there's a big part of why some of these people who had no business being in the ring were in the ring for absurd amounts of time. It's how the wrestler found any base, that was a whole, with any basis of any idea of what wrestling was. Sadly, that story is more truth than not.
I think the issue is just that a lot of wrestlers nowadays, there's not an exit strategy. There's not a way to do things outside of wrestling to make a living other than being involved in wrestling. And the opportunities that exist are very far and few in between.
Well, and you got to remember, there's really, as much as they say there's guaranteed money, there's no guaranteed money in wrestling. I mean, when it's done, it's done. And that kind of gets me to the other point I wanted to make on who's to blame, because it's a big part of it is that WWE's booking has been absolutely so monstrously bad that they have no stars, so they need to rely on nostalgia acts like this. And that's why they keep bringing Goldberg back, because they've dug themselves so far deep into the burning abyss, and they unlimit themselves after being semi-limited for so long, and then all of a sudden they become unlimited. And it's
I
just...
know.
And
it's the same thing with other guys like The Undertaker,
yeah,
who should have retired after WrestleMania 30, but kept going for another 6 years when he really should not have.
And now here I am, sitting here wanting Taker to do one last match because of how disappointed and heartbroken I was with how bad that Survivor Series farewell was. But it's funny how quickly one event can change one's mind on that. But all in all, it's just, I worry about Sting. I do worry about Sting.
I do too, because I've heard that he's in a full-time, multi-year contract, and he's going to be signed as an active wrestler. And the thought of Sting wrestling anyone on that roster besides maybe Cody Rhodes is very scary, because those guys could really, really hurt Sting.
Well, and the thing is, too, it's like, save for Dustin Rhodes, the older guys that they've got right now who aren't managers, right? The managers have been doing great. It's been AEW's their best trait, I think, has been their managers, save for Brandy. But that's right. Easy targets. Anyway, but
deserved targets.
Deserved, exactly. But in any case, it's like, you look at Luther, he's what, 53 or something? I have yet to see a match of his that was worth $1. Unfortunately, you know, obviously Daniels is good. I wouldn't put Daniels in that echelon. He's still in good shape and he still can go. But like, look at Jericho. Look at what happened to Chris Jericho, man. He can't do shit bonanza the way that he used to. And now we're going to add Sting, who's 61. 62. It's I don't know. It's just I don't want these people getting hurt. We saw how much Undertaker nearly was crippled at the hands of Goldberg. And it's just, one of these days somebody's going to get seriously hurt in the ring. Someone's going to get drazzed.
I mean, who was that guy who died in the ring? From Rey Mysterio giving him a 619.
Oh, that's Pero Aguayo Jr.
How old was he?
Early 30s, I think.
And then there was also Mitsuharu Misawa, who literally died in the ring at the age of like 45.
Moondog Spot also
really
died in the ring.
When he really should have retired. And I love Mitsuharu Misawa, but he should not have been wrestling.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's an addiction, man. To some people, it really is an addiction. And
I know.
There's really no good detox drug out there for it.
Other than to go back and go wrestle again.
Yeah. Because, like, remember Flair's TNA run?
I do.
Yeah, I do. Remember how Hogan keeps saying he wants to come back for a match? I do.
I am so concerned that one day AEW is going to give in and we're going to see an AEW World Championship reign from Hulk Hogan.
Oh my God. Could you imagine Hogan versus Sting for the AEW title? Oh, for the love of God.
They would do it.
Wrestling gods out there that aren't named JBL, please make this happen.
No.
At this
no,
point,
because one or both of them are going to die in the ring.
No, because at this point, I think that if you had Hogan and Sting for the AEW Heavyweight Championship match at All Out 2021, Tony Khan would cream his pants so hard it would kill him, and then we'd have a new booker, and then things might start to improve.
No, but if it's going to be Tony Khan and AEW, it has to be Sting versus NWO Hollywood Hulk Hogan.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely, it's going to be. And you know who's going to be there? Horace Hogan. Disco Inferno. Now that we know that Impact is in on the deal. That's right.
Glenn
Gilberti's going to be there.
Referee Scott Hall. Kevin Nash is the outside ring enforcer.
That's right. Everybody's coming back. One last run. They're moving the Monday nights.
Oh God! Imagine if Goldberg wrestled against Sting.
Imagine if Goldberg's like the big defection. He defects over to AEW, and everyone's like, "All right, so."
Oh.
Well, at least AEW's got Shaquille O'Neal, so at least we got that going for us.
No, talk about old guys we shouldn't be fighting.
That's right.
I don't know Shaq, but
that's right.
I swear to God, he's never been trained. He's not doing anything. How old is he?
Hey, he's got to be in his mid-50s now.
He's 48. No,
that's good for 48 is still 48 is pretty up there. Hey, you know what? Mike Tyson just won, although they called it a draw, a celebrity boxing match. So.
Oh yeah, boxing's getting in on this too.
It's time for nostalgia. It's nostalgia time, ladies and gentlemen.
Forget about nostalgia in 2020 because I'm tired of nostalgia in 2020.
Well,
instead, I would like nostalgia going back to 1979, and we can do that right now with our match of the week.
Oh snap!
What time is it? It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's tonight, watch along with the son of a beat. It's one fall, the down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the babyface cheered and the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match of the week.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We're throwing it back to 1979. My man Sean, he found us a treasure.
Well,
he found us something deep in the annals of professional wrestling itself. It is a Pat Patterson match, June 19th, 1979, against poor man Ted DiBiase for the North American Heavyweight title.
Now, I got to back up for a second because I assume you did this on purpose. You meant the annals, right? The annals of the wrestling archives.
Okay, I should have said annals, not annals. Sorry.
No. You don't need to apologize because I thought that was the joke, and I thought that was a funny joke. Because it is, in many ways, it is pulling a match out of WWE's ass, finding one on YouTube from 8 years ago. So the line worked. The line applied. But this match, for those of you who did not see the live stream reaction that I did on Tuesday, by all means, go check that out. It's nice. It's when we finally got the laptop back. It's finally fixed. Keeps going strong, better than ever, actually. Check that out. But I did something I never do for this guy, and I actually watched this match again right before we started.
I think it's important that you do because this is Pat Patterson we're talking about, and you want to have good things you can say about him.
Well, and before we get into this guy, please tell the audience why we were watching this video to begin with.
Well, unfortunately, we lost a legend in the business in Pat Patterson recently.
Yep.
And this is our tribute to him watching one of his old matches. And I'm so happy that we were able to find a match because I realized that he wrestled in the 50s and 60s. And he did some work in the 70s, but most of his matches came before the advent of TV.
Yeah.
So It was difficult, but we were able to finally find a gem in the rough.
Yes, we did. And of course, because we were discussing Pat Patterson last week on the Court-Martail podcast, and we had both admitted that we had not seen almost any of Pat Patterson's in-ring career, so we figured we had to remedy that. And
remedy that we did.
So what did you think of this match?
So this was a weirdly structured match.
Agreed.
Because Ted DiBiase was on top for most of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think by the end, I understood what they were trying to do.
Yes.
And they were trying to make Ted DiBiase the really strong babyface wrestler. And Pat Patterson, by God, he was doing some great selling for him.
Yeah, he was. He was bumping all over the place. And he was really doing some great heel selling because especially for those big moves and those big moments, you could see that he was overselling, taking the really big exaggerated bumps, to really give that emphasis to it. And, the working on the arm I thought was great. Ted looked so young.
I know, it was striking.
It's
especially
weird.
The hair and the mustache, like it wasn't fully afroed out like he normally does.
Yeah, and it was but what I didn't know about this and what I found out is that Ted at this point had been wrestling since 1974. So he had only had about 5 years on the circuits, if you will. On the circuits at the time, which were the territories. And won the North American Championship, so he had to have been fairly young to have won a belt like that. But as a babyface and as the crowd certainly reacted to Ted, he was definitely getting the reactions that a babyface champion needs.
Let's see, he was born in 1954, so 16. So he would have been 25 at this time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of high praise, although I could see that he was still a young wrestler because some of those drop kicks did not look good.
Well, that, and also, if you noticed, like, the way they started this match was that Ted turned his back on Pat, which is something you should never do, and so Pat got the jump on him, which is how this match, that's how it started hot. And getting the jump, obviously that was a great move to get the heels starting first, made the cheer that much more meaningful when he came back and did the big rush. A lot of things that Pat did were subtle but effective.
I have to agree. I liked the way that you're right in that his selling was a bit goofy. Like Ted DiBiase did an Irish whip and Pat bounced off the turnbuckle.
No, as it should be.
In the air. And then, but I like that because the arena that they're in is a pretty big arena. So in order to make sure that you get the reaction you want, you have to emote your entire body so that everyone can see it.
Absolutely.
And this is kind of one of the things I was thinking when I was talking about topic number one was wrestlers doing too much. This was a very basic match.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything particularly... There wasn't the eye-popping moments, but it didn't have to be because this wasn't a main event match.
Yeah. Yeah, this wasn't going to sell out Madison Square Garden. But it was still a very serviceable match, and what I really enjoyed about it was just how involved the fans were. You could see them kind of on the edge of their seats, and what was even better than that was kind of what I would call it is like baseball chatter. Like during some of the arm locks that Ted had, where they were just slow and they were just keeping the pace and bringing the pace down so then they could raise it back up when the next set of moves came along. Whenever they were doing the quote-unquote rest hold, as Smarks like to use gratuitously, people were kind of chatting like they were just chatting with each other, like almost at a baseball game. But there was still like the let's go this guy, or let's go whatever, that type of moment is lost, I think, in today's wrestling because they just try to jam pack it with everything they can.
Exactly, because when I was watching this, I could see this being like at an arena, and you could go there with your friends, and you could have conversations while Pat Patterson and Ted DiBiase are doing their thing with the wrestles. And it's not an insult to the guys that they're doing slow stuff.
No.
It's more that it's just commonplace. It's just wrestling as a sport.
Yeah.
And it making it feel like it's real, It's not going to be the flashiest stuff, but it's real.
Exactly. And I would take, and this is why when I have conversations with certain people who just don't get why I don't care about moves. And I say all the time, I don't give a crap about moves. If I never saw a moonsault or a 450 splash again, fine. I'd be fine with it. You know, it's like, because the art of what I fell in love with was the body language and was the movement and was the story arc behind it, but not the manufactured story that WWE puts out. And there's a distinct difference.
Agreed. And the thing about wrestling moves and doing too much is that when you do too many wrestling moves, what ends up happening is that you lose the story.
Yep.
And in this particular match, what they're very good at is telling a story. And yes, they had some exciting moves towards the middle and end of this match, like when Ted DiBiase is doing his comeback and he's going off the ropes and he's jumping over Pat Patterson, he does drop kicks and Japanese arm drags. But he's getting the crowd excited with the storytelling of being on top. Pat Patterson starts trying to come back and Ted DiBiase puts him down again.
Yeah, and forcing, and the best part was forcing. I loved that. That's kind of what I enjoyed about this format of this match, because it was different than what I usually get with just shine the baby face, heel, heat, comeback, finish, because this told a different story. This told a story that Pat Patterson could not beat Ted DiBiase at all, unless he cheated.
And it's clear for the first 8 minutes of this match that Pat Patterson is way over his head with a very young, very spry Ted DiBiase.
Yeah.
But then, towards the end of the match, Pat Patterson throws Ted DiBiase into the referee, and the ref takes a bump. And Pat Patterson reaches into his trunks and grabs the brass knucks. As Ted DiBiase comes from behind,
Bam.
Pat Patterson, one shot, and down goes Ted DiBiase.
That's all it takes. 1, 2, 3. There's your champ. And the people were pissed. If you look out at the people, they were yelling.
Oh, yes. And I have to rewatch it. I think they were throwing stuff into the ring.
Yes, they were. Now, that is heat. That is heat. And Patterson got it so nicely. And you know what's interesting? 2 other interesting notes about this match. I like when Ted was doing the knee drops into Pat's arm, that the crowd was actually getting into those knee drops. When was the last time a knee drop got any sort of reaction in wrestling?
It wasn't just that he was doing knee drops, but he wasn't actually doing it on Pat Patterson. He was doing it on the arm next to Pat Patterson, firing the crowd up, and then did the knee drop.
Yeah. It's like, but it's actually, you know, that was great. And then when Pat threw Ted into the announce table, that one action alone of him throwing him into the table got heat. But then the pop got even louder when Ted turned it out on fair play and hit him with the table. And then, of course, the ref bump and then the brass knucks, and that's your deal. But this is a match that I would put in wrestling schools to teach.
No doubt. And by the way, do you know the interesting thing about this particular match and its history in wrestling?
It has to do with the North American Championship, I'm assuming.
Yes, it does, because this was a very short-lived championship.
Yes.
Ted DiBiase was the first champion, and Pat Patterson won the championship and then combined it in a fictional South American heavyweight championship tournament, and is the genesis for the modern-day Intercontinental Championship.
Well, what do you know? So we actually predated the Intercontinental Championship with this matchup. Yep. That's pretty cool. For the man
But the North American Championship was the predecessor of the Intercontinental Championship. And it would be just September 1st, 1979, 3 months later, when its conception was born, and that's all due to Pat Patterson.
Who won that tournament in Rio de Janeiro, and the rest was history.
And the rest is history.
The rest was history. So thank you, Pat. Cheers to you for this match of the week, because it was a fun one. It really was a fun one.
R.I.P. to Pat Patterson and Ted DiBiase. Your spotlight is coming soon because one day I want to talk about you.
Yeah, seriously. Seriously. But
we have a different superstar that we would like to spotlight. And it's one that has grown immensely over the past few years, if I say so myself. It is one that has truly gained great size in the wrestling business. It is a star who has truly mastered the ways of the circle, if you get my understanding. And that is one Chris Jericho.
yeah, he no longer is in charge of the inner circle because the belt busted on the inner circle, so now it's the outer circle.
It's the entire circle.
So just big old circle. You know what? We're gonna call it the globe. And anyway, so Chris's career, this sucks because what sucks about doing this spotlight is that for most of Chris's career, I really loved Chris. And then again, kind of like when I talked about The Undertaker, it's just been these couple of, it's really just this past year and a half that things have just, the taste in my mouth is soured so badly for this guy.
It's definitely gotten worse ever since he lost the AEW World Championship, because he's been involved in some of the worst programming in professional wrestling today. It's not even close. It's like, what's that Stampede match being called out? I don't know what it was.
The Stadium Stampede match?
Stadium Stampede, there it is.
Yes.
Stadium Stampede. The weird feud with Orange Cassidy and the Mimosa
match. The Mimosa match. Good God.
The weird match with MJF, and now MJF being a member of the Inner Circle. That dumb Las Vegas segment.
Chris Jericho started out in ECW, and I didn't really see a whole ton of his ECW stuff, but I caught Chris Jericho when I first saw Chris was in 2002, but when Chris first showed up, it was 96. And I love 96 WCW Chris Jericho.
Definitely. I think Chris Jericho was vastly underrated in World Championship Wrestling because he was a rare combination of a guy who was a high flyer, not a big guy, but someone who could not only put on a good match, but to do a good promo.
Yeah, and he was so entertaining doing the list of 1,004 holds, him making fun of Dean Malenko week after week after week after week after Malenko had left, that built to maybe one of the biggest WCW pops of all time, which was Malenko winning the Battle Royal at Halloween Havoc and revealing himself instead of Cyclope. He lifts his head, he lifts his entire head off and detaches it from his body, and everyone realizes it's him, and the whole place go banana.
And then the continuous ass kicking that Dean Malenko handed to Chris Jericho.
Yeah, Chris was great. I mean, 2000, and then Chris came to WWE, and we should not forget Smoky Mountain. As the corner, we should not forget Smoky Mountain.
Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Because that's where he started, was with Lance Storm as the Thrill Seekers. He was very green at the time, but he did passably what he had to do. But he was... I mean... They were really spot-oriented.
Well, he was also a student of the game. Like, yes, he was still green, but you could tell that he was definitely one of the most talented guys who had potential to grow out. And he really reached that potential when he joined WWF in 2000. Everyone, of course, remembers the famous Y2J promo.
That was 99.
And his debut opposite. Was it?
That was 1999, yeah, because that was when the Y2K stuff was being talked about. So they made the Y2J, because then he had those, like, that Intercontinental title match with, like, Jeff Jarrett and Chyna. And he was in a whole mess of stuff, and then he came out to interrupt The Rock.
Yep.
And then
there was that There was that storyline in the early 2001 with Chris Benoit. That was a great rivalry, really underrated in the list of Jericho rivalries.
It's a shame. It's an honest shame that everything of Benoit's has been erased from history, because that ladder match between Jericho and Benoit in 2001 for the Intercontinental title is, I would argue, maybe my favorite ladder match.
It was a very vastly underrated ladder match. It's just sad that we can't talk about
it's tremendous
because of the circumstances.
Yeah, it's just a shame that it can't get recognized the way that it should, just because of, but in any case, but Chris's WWE career was great. I mean, he had mastered the things that were missing from him in WCW. He reinvented himself. He was really the first that people discussed about consistently reinventing who he was and adding depth to his character. And I hate to use the phrase character, depth to his gimmick, but...
No, honestly, it's not an insult to Chris Jericho, because he really is a unique character. Because when you think of Chris Jericho, there are so many faces to Chris Jericho.
Yeah.
From early WCW 1,000 holds, 4 holds, to Y2J, to Undisputed Champion. Him beating The Rock and Stone Cold in the same night was legendary for his career.
Yeah. And for a guy who many would probably argue was not the archetype guy to be in that position. And no offense to Jericho, I don't think Jericho was really at that state. I don't know if he was ready at that point even, just because, he got into that feud with Triple H, which was okay. But considering that, that they had Hogan and The Rock at the time, and then they gave Hogan the belt in the way AEW's gonna, but in any, but Jericho, then he got King of the World Jericho in 2002, and then that kind of goes into 2003, and then he has the highlight reel, which was another big point, and then he gets fired to go do Fozzy tours for a couple years, and then the Save Us.
What did
you think of the Save Us promos? Were you invested at all at that time?
I wasn't really watching Raw that time. I was more of a SmackDown guy during that time period, so I wasn't paying much attention to it.
I feel you.
I thought they were okay, but it's just it's not Chris's best work.
I think it was fine. I liked the outfit, but
the outfit was cool.
I think that it was. I think he also got his feud returns were weird, because he came back to face Randy Orton for the belt, and then hit JBL on commentary, and then JBL came out of retirement to go beat up Jericho, and that was like out of left field, and we're like, oh, okay. So I guess Chris isn't gonna do fun stuff when he's back, which is why I think out of necessity he ended up having to go into that really stoically his best work, from some of his not his best work to his hands down best work, 2008 feud with Shawn Michaels into 2009's feud with Rey Mysterio.
Actually, no. It's not arguable. His best work ever was with Shawn Michaels in 2008, because this was a motivated Chris Jericho who just had 2 stinker feuds, and he really brought it. And Shawn Michaels did too. That was some of the best work that Shawn Michaels has done in years, was with Chris Jericho. Yeah.
Here's a fun story. If you read Chris Jericho's 3rd book, Best in the World at What I Have No Idea. I'm not trying to sell his book. I just happen to have read it. But if you read that book, you will hear the story of during that moment at SummerSlam where Shawn Michaels retires. And this is common knowledge at this point. When Jericho went to punch Shawn Michaels, Jericho hit Shawn Michaels' wife in the face for real as hard as he could.
I remember that, and I remember him being so sorry to her backstage, like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Oh my God, I'm so sorry."
Yeah, and she's pretty much just like, "Is that all you got?"
Well, clearly she's been hit more than a few times.
That was her response. I'm not even going to touch that one. That's going to get us straight up canceled. Come on, Sky.
I know.
This is your show. You can't get us canceled on your show.
But I will say this. That moment got him so much heat.
Yeah.
He was so hated. He was arguably the most hated guy on the roster.
Yeah.
And that really led to his what made the Shawn Michaels match and feud look so good that it was so real, because it was.
Yeah.
And you can't fake that kind of heat and energy and excitement that he had.
Yeah, there was it honestly was great. And everything Chris, and then even still, there were times in WWE where Chris was the most entertaining guy of anybody there. 2010, 11, 12, 13, where he's in and out, and he had a couple of fun debuts and fun Rumble bits, but,
I will say his run with Big Show as Jericho is an underrated tag team.
It is. And their feuds with DX were actually kind of fun, I will say. And then, of course, they got just bad luck with the whole Jericho and Edge deal. And then that match did not live up to expectations, unfortunately.
It was just too much of Edge taking the piss out of Chris Jericho. Like, Edge kept winning the feud too much every single week.
Yeah, that could have been more. But in Chris's case, he was still on top of his game. He was in great shape. He did Dancing with the Stars, and then he left. And he left for a little bit. He left for a little bit,
and then he came back in 2016, and he reinvented himself again with the list of Jericho.
Yes,
and created more great moments,
which got massively and wildly over. And then, like I said, that was one of the most entertaining parts of that year. I mean, there were some good matches in 2016, but that year really was Jericho's year. And then they did the whole thing with him and Kevin Owens and blah, blah, blah. And then he went...
And the thing about it is that at his age at the time, he was, in his mid-40s? And he was still in fantastic shape.
Yeah, and everybody...
Which he should not have been.
Everybody had a lot of respect for Chris at that time. He was even putting good matches on with RVD at the time. He was doing good stuff, and then he goes and he does some work for New Japan, which was all pretty solid, and did a lot of good business.
It did, and he made history by winning the Intercontinental Championship of the IWPG from New Japan Pro Wrestling.
That's right.
And his stuff in Japan, I think, rejuvenated him, because towards the end of his WWE run, he was kind of getting a little more stale.
He was getting stale.
And I think he liked having more freedom, because you could clearly tell he enjoyed being able to swear.
Yes, he definitely did. And then
unfortunately, it leads to what we have now.
And now, at All In, when Jericho came and made that big, did the dressed up as Pentagon and hit Omega with the code breaker and that was exciting, because at that point Jericho was still on top of his game. He was in good shape. He could still go. But this year and change, when he was world champion, he was working hard. But then now it's just like he just makes boneheaded decisions. It's just some of these things that he goes along with. I think that you're talking about wrestling being addiction. I think he's addicted to having the cheers, no matter how stupid the cheers are, and no matter how few people are cheering.
Exactly. Did you hear about what's been happening at recent events, and in particular with his music and how it's being edited?
I believe it.
No. Do you know how it's been edited?
How so?
So when he does his entrance, he likes having the fans sing the chorus.
Yes,
to his song.
The two choruses. Yes, I did hear about this.
But apparently, a couple of the recent shows, the fans have only been singing one chorus, and he keeps urging them to do two. And when when AEW does their post-production, they put in a second chorus, which is clearly made in the truck, because when the chorus is happening, everyone is sitting down.
Yeah, bad. It's just sad. It's just sad because, again, Jericho, I really liked Chris. I still do. I like all of what Chris has done up to AEW's point. It's just, at what point do you just say, enough's enough? And I feel like Jericho's going to be another one of those guys. We're going to see him wrestling into his mid-60s because he won't be able to help himself.
And this is a guy who clearly has money. This is not an issue of him wrestling because he needs to make money.
Well,
like,
but money does talk.
I don't know how Sting does with his finances.
A billionaire's money does talk, hence why we're seeing Sting, so.
But that's the thing. If you have your integrity and you know that you are not good anymore, walk away, save your legacy. Because had he had retired after he lost the World Championship, which is what he should have done, like, we would still consider him one of the greatest of all time. And he still is. It's just, he's taking his legacy and he's pissing on it because he doesn't care anymore. And it's a shame.
It's just a shame. It's just a shame because that's what the wrestling business is now. And because of how over-reliant it is on nostalgia acts, they're going to keep encouraging this kind of behavior. And I feel bad, but this is wrestling business. But you know what? It doesn't have to be like this for everybody. Hopefully, people will learn the error of their ways and stay tuned for different booking, better booking of people and respectful booking of veterans if they're even in the equation. And where can we find the quality booking that people so much seek, Sky?
We can find it on the Court-Martail podcast.
That's right.
But I do want to make one final point on Chris Jericho.
Yes.
And that is that if we're going to see any match now from present-day Chris Jericho, there's only one man who should face him. And that man is my co-host.
Oh, we're going to do this? We're going to do... Okay. All right, I see. See, I wasn't prepared for this, Sky. I didn't know you were going to put me into this position.
Then allow me to speak for you, my man. Chris Jericho, we're calling you out. We see you, and it is clear as day that you just don't have it anymore. So like the dog in Old Yeller, you clearly need to be put out of your misery. And there's only one man for that job, and he is your Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty. So Chris Jericho, we are laying out the challenge. Let's see if you can still go. Let's see if you are still the Ayatollah of rock and roll. Let's see if you are still Y2J. Let's see if you are still the God. Because my man, Sean, he is in the best physical shape of his career. He can lift you up and he can slam you down. And he's going to make you the fraud that you know you are.
If I may, Sky, if I may have a word, thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate the words of encouragement, because this is the kind of man you want in your corner. But let's not talk about the man in the corner, because I've got the man in my corner right here at Skyler Greenberg, who's hosted a tremendous show today, who's done a great job. And you know, the best part about being the host of a podcast where you're universally loved and respected is that you know the people you can rely on when you need to take a step back and let somebody else tag in. But now it's time to run solo on my own here, because Chris, it's not just something professional between you and me. I don't care about your podcast. I don't care about my podcast views versus your podcast views. This has nothing to do with entertainment value whatsoever. But Chris, I've been watching pro wrestling my entire life. I fell in love with pro wrestling since I was 4 years old, and day in and day out, I was the man alone, the only child, the only individual who could hang out with friends. Nah, he'd rather watch his wrestling. He'd rather imitate wrestling. He'd rather pretend that he was wrestling a guy like you because he respected you. He idolized you and what you were, and moreover, he idolized pro wrestling. and everything that pro wrestling is and was. The storytelling, the heart, the competition, the true battle that it takes two men who go to the depths to come back, one victorious and the other fallen. I loved that sport. But what you do now, Chris, what you've done this past year for AEW is you've spit in my love's face. You've kicked it while it's down. You've sodomized its corpse and left it for dead on the sidewalk. And it doesn't matter how far you drive. It doesn't matter which planes you fly in. It doesn't matter how much money you rake in so you could spend it in Jersey and at Sturgis doing band music that nobody wants to listen to. The fact of the matter is, Chris, you are an entertainment mogul. I am an entertainment mogul who is ready to kick the man who insulted my business's ass. Because I take this business very seriously. And every time that you step one step further into idiocracy, one step further into a vat of mimosa, wearing your neckerchief and thinking that you're got what it takes, just remember this. I have nothing better to do than to love pro wrestling. What are you doing, Chris? Anytime, anywhere, any place, you and me, one-on-one. It doesn't even need to be in front of a camera. We don't even need to have audio recording. I don't care. At this point, this is a fight. And before it's said and done, and my hand is raised, and your hand is laid, one on one side, one on the other side, as a tear falls from your eye as the realization hits you that you are the past and I am the present, the future, and the legacy killer. Not the legend killer, because I don't mess with copyright. Let's get that very clear. Copyright's lame. But I go to put legacies to bed. And yours has long since asked for its bedtime story, and you get to have it read to you when I see you next. I don't care when it is, but when this promo's over next week, and I'm finished talking, and I haven't derailed myself by this point, and I come back with a better, fired up promo, you better have gotten your eggs in your basket, pal, because I plan to kick that basket, stomp every one of those eggs, and then stomp your face in like you deserve. And that, my friend, is a fact.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, is our fantastic show. We thank you for listening to the Court-Martail podcast. Click like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with your friends. My co-host, Sean, I am glad that you were on this journey with me, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, Sky, this was real fun. It was fun to have this be your assignment to read. We will thank you for processing your application. We are going to get back to you within the next couple of weeks as far as whether yay or nay for the co-hosting, but we have received your application. Thank you very much. You have your confirmation email in the mail, and the complimentary gift basket is en route via the U.S. Postal Service, so when it gets there is anybody's guess. But thank you, Sky, for hosting this show. Very fun show. Had a great time. And, of course, stay tuned, folks, next week for ACPW and NWL. Take us home, Sky.
That is right. My friends, next week is the finale of the National Wrestling League and ACPW Summer Special Booking. And we have two fantastic cards for you with two major main events. National Wrestling League's Drew McIntyre versus Kevin Owens, and ACPW's Brian Cage versus some guy. No,
Jeff.
Jeff, don't kill me. Please don't kill me.
You don't have to worry about me killing you. You have to worry about him killing you.
I have to worry about Jeff Cobb killing me and then Duke Cornette spitting on my grave.
Could happen.
But with that, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for tuning in, and we will see you all next week after these commercial messages.